All right, if everyone could please mute their audio so we can get started. I'm looking at you, Mom. Khosh amadid, salam, welcome. It's a real honor to be here today, although it is hard to believe we're already commemorating the first anniversary of my grandfather's passing. I'm proudly here as a representative of our Baba June 6 grandchildren, and each of us has been profoundly shaped by his kindness, his generosity, and his humanity. And we are certainly not the only individuals he inspired. He touched the lives of countless Iranians throughout the course of his life. And it is fitting that the 10th of December also marks Human Rights Day, an occasion which reminds us of our need to continue advancing the right to freedom, dignity, and equal opportunity in and outside of Iran. My grandfather's commitment to public service was inspired by these values, and we are here today because of his belief in the power of education to advance global prosperity. Persia Educational Foundation was his brainchild, and we are grateful that his legacy will live on in the form of a scholarship fund aimed at students dedicated to a life in public service and human rights. I will now hand over to my dear aunt, Shahin Naseri, who serves as founder and trustee of the foundation, and she will share more about the scholarship and vision behind this work. And afterwards, we'll be hearing from Mr. Amir Tahiri, Professor Mahmoud Amiri Muqaddam, and Sam Loney about their perspectives on these matters. Nazanin June, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Safura June, and it's such a pleasure and honor to be here with Mr. Tahiri, Professor Amiri Muqaddam, and Mr. Sam Loney. My father would have been very, very happy to see that you all have joined in this anniversary. As Mr. Tahiri wrote last year, my father belonged to that generation of young, forward-looking, and can-do Iranians who combined a deep attachment to their ancestral culture with modern skills of management. He was educated in Iran and the United States. He held several key posts to develop Iran and improve the life of Iranian citizens. He was Treasurer General, he was Minister of Labor and Social Affairs, Minister of Interior, founder of Workers' Welfare Bank, Governor General and Managing Director of Khuzestan Water and Power Authority, Deputy Chair of the High Council of the celebration of the 2500th anniversary of the Persian monarchy at Persepolis, Managing Director of the Imperial Organization for Social Services, which supported over 60 charitable organizations. He planned and implemented the National Campaign for Philanthropy and the countrywide program for protection of families who had lost their support. While he was living out in Paris, away from Iran after the revolution, he continued to dedicate his time and resources to advance the Iranian community and also support Iranian youth. He was a good student himself and pursued his studies, and it was his education that he thought would open the gateway for where he ended up in Iran and after. He believed that the key to advancement was education, and his own life story is a testament to that, as my sister Kathy wrote to me recently. He helped students throughout his career, and he sent students abroad with scholarships from Iran so that they could return and help build the country. I won't take up more of your time, but I just want to say that he laid the foundation for Persia education to continue his desire to help students. And Iran was always his destination. So to honor his legacy, we have formally launched the Abdolreza Ansari Scholarship at Persia to give a helping hand to those dedicated to a life in public service and human rights. And as far as we know, there's no such fund reserved for the Iranian community elsewhere. Applicants should be of Iranian descent, of any age or citizenship, enrolled in a master's or a PhD program with a record of accomplishment in public service or human rights. The applicant needs to present a record of accomplishment, not only to pursue to present a record of accomplishment, but also demonstrate how the pursuit of higher education will allow the applicant to have a more significant impact in their chosen field. And I won't take up any more of your time, except to say that to get more information, please visit our website, www.persia.education. And with that, I pass it on to you, Safarajun. Thank you.
Thank you, Nazanin June, and for particularly being the engine behind this work. The scholarship is a really fantastic opportunity. We hope that all those watching can help mobilize applications from young Iranians deserving of the scholarship. So now we will swiftly move on to hear from three of our panelists who each bring a unique perspective on public service and human rights, and then we'll follow their presentations with a quick Q&A. And first, we'll hear from Mr. Amir Tahiri, who spoke beautifully at my grandfather's funeral last year. Mr. Tahiri is a renowned international columnist and author who formerly served as editor-in-chief of Kayhan, and he has authored several books, and he has written for nearly every respected publication and currently contributes to the German weekly Focus. Mr. Tahiri, the floor is yours.
Mr. Tahiri.
I know he's there.
Yes, he's here. Mr. Tahiri. Okay, maybe we could go to the next presenter. They may be having technical difficulty.
Okay, well, next on our list, and we'll come back to Mr. Tahiri, is Sam Loney. I hope, Sam, you're ready to go. Sam has been widely recognized for his work in sustainable development, public policy, and environmental change. And as well as being a program director at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He has just graduated from University of Oxford with a master's degree in environmental change and management and has further studies to go, but congratulations. Sam has a remarkable personal story and is undoubtedly one of the brightest young leaders in the Iranian community today. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you very much. And I hope you can hear me okay. Yes. Great. Okay, so a big thank you to the Persia Education Foundation. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. And I want to start off by actually saying congratulations to the winners of the scholarship, but also Happy Human Rights Day to all children, adults, girls and boys, and non-binary people around the world, of all genders and of all races and social groups and religious beliefs. Happy Human Rights Day to you all. But I really actually want to wish Happy Human Rights Day in particular, especially to my parents, and it's because of them that I pursued essentially a career in social impact, and I decided to dedicate my life to human rights and justice and sustainable development as a form of achieving that. I was born in Iran to the two individuals I consider to be my heroes, and those are my parents, who were human rights activists in their 20s. They risk their lives every single day in order to raise awareness and to really bring human rights and justice to Iran. And for me, this was an incredible and a big source of inspiration. That my parents had dedicated this to their lives, but they were actually both imprisoned and tortured because of their activism. And for me, the question I always had growing up is why? Why would you risk your lives? Why would you risk your youth? Why would you risk the pain? Why would you sacrifice everything day after day, knowing that potentially you could get caught in any moment and lose it all? What inspired you to really take that risk, which was just around the corner, and it eventually did happen? And do you regret it? And their answer always shakes me to this day, because I remember that they would always say, it's like, well, someone has to do it. Someone has to fight for human rights. Someone must make the sacrifice. And for us, it was both a duty, but also an honor to dedicate our lives for the betterment of humanity and for helping our society become a better place and a more humane place. And for me, this really is the essence of public service. It's the essence of dedicating yourself for people and communities and the planet, and to really do this at your personal sacrifice. So it is really these ideas that got me into the field that I'm in now, and got me to go to work with the United Nations, and really to continue to really dedicate my life to this, and proudly so. And I would say that now more than ever, we need human rights, and now more than ever, we need the leadership of young people around the world, in particular in countries that are facing systematic abuse of human rights, like Iran, to really push for creating norms and institutions that are really built on the principles of human rights. In Iran, there is a lack of institutions based on human rights, and in order to be able to protect victims, hold abuses of power and human rights abuses to account. And there really isn't a culture of human rights manifesting. And that's because every time there has been an attempt to fight for these things, the repression has been absolutely brutal and has been just unforgiven. And in face of those fears, it is still incredible to see young people, just as my parents had done, continue to stand up for these things. And as a source of inspiration, I say, if they are doing that in front of bullets and at the risk of torture, I, and certainly others who receive this scholarship, can go ahead and fight for these things and outside of the country, and to do so at even personal risk and sacrifice. But really, to build these institutions, I think we need leaders like the next generation of young Iranians. Many are already doing that, but to continue to build the efforts, and events such as these and scholarships such as these provides impetus and encouragement and celebrates their work, but also creates a community around being able to do something like this. And I think that is just fundamental. So for me, being a good public servant and public service really comes down to three core qualities. One is being uncompromising on issues of human rights. And what I mean by that is no trade-offs between human rights and other matters. Sometimes I hear people talk about potential solutions to human rights crises by essentially trading off human rights, or as you say, kind of using the mentality of the ends justify the means. And I think it's very important to have quite uncompromising views on human rights, because if you have, these are principles and they must be abided by in every circumstance. Otherwise they lose their legitimacy, and then it is a slippery slope from there. So that quality, I think, is very important to me. Secondly, I think it is to building institutions. I don't think it's enough for individuals and people to go on platforms and talk about human rights, although I think that is the first step. There must actually be efforts, a communal effort to build educations, to introduce norms, but also to actually build institutional arrangements which protect human rights and stand up for them. And these are really lacking in many parts of the world, and particularly so within Iran, for reasons I explained before. And finally, be committed to making sacrifices. The business of changing the world is not an easy one, and there will always be tough choices to be made. And if you're not open and understand that sometimes sacrifices has to be made, individuals sacrifices to make a bigger difference, that is something for me the ultimate public servant does. So I think the Ansari Scholarship provides a wonderful opportunity for young leaders of Iranian descent to step forward and to introduce and begin working towards real change. And to do so and to celebrate it on Human Rights Day, I think is very fitting. And I hope that becomes the focus of the work that's being done. And with that, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this day. And I would like to now hand back to Sephora. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sam, so much. And as I mentioned before, I preface this by saying a really obviously humbling story and an inspiring story, and an exemplary, example of a young individual who has used their hardship, who has worked through a really challenging educational system as well to achieve his successes to where he is today. And I think there is no better person to pass on to afterwards, as Professor Mahmoud Amiri Muqaddam, who is a Norwegian Iranian neuroscientist and human rights advocate, who certainly has a unique combination of disciplines in his area of work. But Mr. Amiri Muqaddam has a number of medical achievements under his belt and is currently a professor in medicine and head of the laboratory of molecular neuroscience at the University of Oslo. And he is also the co-founder and spokesperson for the NGO Iran Human Rights, which monitors the violations of human rights in Iran. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Sephora. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you to Persia Educational Foundation for having me here. I must say that I read a little bit about Mr. Ansari's, what he has done, and I think many people are grateful for what he has done for the Iranian youth education, and I think it's great that the family is following his path. I'm going to talk about a little bit about, of course, since this meeting is on the Human Rights Day, to talk about human rights and human rights situation. So I would like to share with you just a few slides, if it's possible. It was, let me see, sorry. Yeah, here it is. Right. So, so on this day in 1948, basically United Nations General Assembly adopted the declaration about on the human rights, and what it basically meant was that there is an agreement across the boundaries of different religions, different ethnical groups, different political affiliations, that some rights should be given to all human beings. So that's a very big start, but all of us know that people around the world have been struggling to reach even some of these rights. But thanks to this day, what happened in 1948, I think many people know what they should fight for. So I think it had also an educational aspect. I think most of you know this lady, Rosa Parks. In 1955, actually in December, these days, she was sitting on a bus. I mean, that's for what she is so famous. She was sitting on a bus, in a segregated bus in the Montgomery, and when the white-only part of the bus was filled, the driver came to the first row in the black part of the bus and asked Rosa and the three people sitting by her side to move to the back of the bus because there was a white gentleman who didn't have a seat. The three other gentlemen, they followed that order. They moved to the back of the bus, but Rosa didn't do that. As she later said, it wasn't because she was tired and wanted to sit, but it was because she was tired of giving in day after day. So at that moment, when she decided to say no, she didn't know what would happen. What she was sure of was that it will have some serious consequences for her. But just she didn't care. She didn't want to give in anymore. So she was arrested. She received a fine of altogether $14 and a suspended sentence. But what this simple, I would say, simple act of just sitting on your seat led to was a huge bus boycott, a boycott of Montgomery bus by the Black community. And that led to a Supreme Court ruling 1 year later, which desegregated the public transportation in the Montgomery. I'm sure that she didn't know that so many people would become inspired by her act. And probably she didn't know that within just 1 year from then, she could sit in the same bus as you see in this picture and actually have reached a goal. But we must also say that she paid also a much larger or bigger price than the $14 and the suspended sentence. She was threatened several times. Her life was threatened. She lost her job. All of us know how important it is. Just imagine, what would you do if you knew that doing it would lead to losing your job, just for a matter of principle? But thanks to the fact that so many people got inspired, she actually made a huge change. So now, since then, I think thousands or maybe millions of human rights defenders around the world have been struggling to reach their fundamental rights. I have some examples because next week, our NGO, Iran Human Rights, is going to publish a report on about 100 human rights defenders in Iran. Perhaps you know this young lady, Saba Kordafshari. I think she was also tired of giving in and obeying the ridiculous rules that a few men have decided in her country, Iran. So one day she removed her headscarf in protest to the compulsory hijab. She was sentenced to 24 years in prison. There have been some changes in her sentence, but she's still in prison. She has had a very tough time. She had COVID last year. Her mom was arrested and has been in prison. And that's a very high price just for doing maybe something that most people in the world would take as granted, having a headscarf or not. This gentleman, Mohammad Najafi, a lawyer, what did he do? I mean, he's a courageous lawyer. He revealed publicly that his client, a protester, didn't commit suicide as the authorities claimed, but was killed as a result of torture. So he said it publicly. He gave interviews to the media. He held speeches. Do you think he didn't know how dangerous it was to do something like that? Especially after having seen that your client is dead because he was protesting and he died of torture. But Mohammad Najafi still didn't remain silent. He was sentenced to more than 19 years in prison, and there have been changes to his original sentence. He's still in prison. They are making some new cases against him. He suffered heart attack a few months ago. He hasn't been receiving appropriate treatment. And finally, Shahin Naseri, an ordinary citizen, didn't have any political background or human rights related activities. He was actually in custody for economic crime. One day, while he was in the corridor, he heard somebody screaming as if he was being beaten. He managed to have a look inside the room. They were beating a young man so badly, and he was screaming. And he said that they broke his hand while I was watching. Later, he got to know that this man was Navid Afkari, an Iranian wrestler who was arrested after some protests. But the authorities wanted to force him to confess that he has committed a murder. And eventually they hanged Navid Afkari based on confessions that he had given under torture. But Shahin Naseri, he has seen these scenes. He knows what kind of system it is. He could have just been quiet and finished her sentence. I don't remember how long it was, maybe a few months, and live his life. But what he did.
من نمیدونم صدای من میشنوین؟ چون من فقط میبینم شاهین ناصری نوشته.
Yes, Shahin Naseri. So what he did, he decided to give testimony, go to the court, written, but when the court didn't pay any attention, he actually made it public. What happened to him was that he died in custody a few months ago. After he gave his testimony, they moved him to another prison. And on the first anniversary of Navid Afkari's execution, they transferred him to solitary confinement. And the day after, his dead body out. So these are examples of people who could, probably all of them, could have had a completely normal lives if they had decided to be quiet and to give in to what the authorities are demanding. This high price is being paid by many human rights defenders. And of course, the more we are, the more, or the higher the number of ordinary people who join them becomes, the price they have to pay gets lower. So back to what we are here for, the value of human rights education. When you convince people and you show them actually you don't need to accept the conditions that you're living under, if they know their rights and if all of them demand it, I think then we can make a change. So I just finish here. I ask you, or I hope you can visit our website next week, because we are going to publish short reports about 100 human rights defenders. Thank you so much. I stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmadi Moqaddam, for sharing that and contextualizing the human rights situation in Iran currently as it stands. I think it's an excellent transition to go to Mr. Tahiri now, who will maybe speak about other days in Iran and my grandfather's service while he was still working there at the time. And then we can enter into a discussion about actions that we can take as a result and tie it back to the theme of education that we're here for today. So Mr. Tahiri, over to you.
That I could very quickly run into the present situation in Iran. We have a situation in which the government of the country does not recognize even its own laws. There is the minimum demand that people inside the country have is the application of at least the existing laws. The second problem is the lack of information about human rights. How many prisoners do we have? Sometimes we get reports that we have over 300,000 prisoners of all kinds. They are not, of course, all human rights prisoners, but in many cases, according to official reports, they are kept in a very inhuman situation. The third very important question is the lack of circulation of actual and reliable information. The information is like blood in a body. It must circulate freely so that it can keep the body politics of a nation safe and secure. Unfortunately, this has not happened. We have seen that big demonstrations, protests, most recently in Isfahan, even official media of the regime, controlled by the regime, are not allowed to send reporters to cover them in a normal way. Iran is number 3 in the number of journalists actually in prison. So these are, the main concerns at the moment.
Hello, we're going through a little thing where I can't unmute myself. Thank you, Tahiri John, and thank you, Mr. Tahiri, for adding on to what Mr. Ahmadi Moqaddam shared. And we would love to hear from you as well, as we did in the piece commemorating my grandfather's life, but also at the funeral itself, in terms of describing the contribution that he made to public service in Iran and some of the achievements that we're here today also to commemorate, if you would be so kind to share. Thank you. Yes, certainly, I would be proud to do so. The late Abdolreza Ansari was a great patriot, an esteemed public servant. I had the good fortune of meeting him when I was a very young reporter. He was governor of Khuzestan, our southwest province. And since then, I followed, his career. He belonged to the first generation of Iranian public service managers or directors who had a Western education, and he brought new techniques of management to Iran. There were about 30 or 40 of them initially who had studied in the United States briefly or for a longer period. Then they had joined the American aid scheme called Point Forward, launched by President Truman when Iran was really in dire straits, just emerging from the Second World War, the attempt by the Soviet Union to detach our province of Azerbaijan, and so on. And this new group of technocrats, if you like, and managers
had the huge task of rebuilding a shattered state apparatus, because the Iranian state apparatus had been really badly shaken by the Second World War for three reasons. First of all, the older generation had retired, or had really become dispirited. People like Foroughi, like Tarizadeh, like Allah, and many others have gone. So the new generation had to take over. The second reason was lack of money, because Iran at that moment got a very rough deal on exports of its oil. Its agriculture had been shattered during the war. Its infrastructure was shaky. The gold reserves of its central bank had been taken to Russia by Stalin, and was not to come back much later. The debt that the British had to us, for using our railway, for I don't want to say plundering, but using our food stuff to feed the Soviet army to fight Hitler and so on. They would just give us an IOU, but no cash. The only ones that gave us money for what they took from us were the Americans, who had come a bit later as occupiers. So the situation was really dire, and this new generation had a tremendous task. But what I saw in the case of Abdolreza Ansari, and in the cases of many of other members of that generation, was the patience, the love of Iran, their attachment to public service, their selflessness, their readiness to work long hours, and no holidays, and go to the remotest parts of the country where health situation was dicey. There was no hotel services, nothing. It was really, and then within 10, 15 years, there was a new Iran emerged, and in it, the late friend, the late Abdolreza Ansari played a key role. Most importantly, as the head of the Royal Organization for Social Services, which brought the idea of welfare state, the Western idea of welfare state, to Iran, and it was a parallel to the formal government, which was unable in many cases to provide the health and education and so on, and the organization did that. Another reason I have, personal reason I have for remembering him, is the help that he gave us through the Royal Organization for Social Services to publish a free newspaper called Ruzeno, New Day, in over 1 million copies for newly literate Iranians, because Iran was going through a massive campaign of against illiteracy. And we produced a newspaper. I mean, not me personally. I was just, the editor of the main newspaper. But people like Sirus Amuzegar, like Siamak Purzand, like Iraj Nabavi, and many, many others who worked on that paper, which was produced, with a limited vocabulary, just 2,000 words, so that the newly literate wouldn't be scared, and gradually we would build up their vocabulary, so that when they had a better mastery of the language, they could buy our own newspaper. So from our point of view, it was not totally disinterested. We also had a business interest in it, but of course Ansari didn't have a business interest in it. He just had the social and cultural interest. And this was a newspaper which towards the end, its circulation rose to around 3 million, and each newspaper was read by several people. So it covered a huge audience. After the revolution, Ansari came to France, and I was partly in myself in France, and I saw how he helped many Iranian exiles obtain, residence permits, housing, access to health, and so on. The usual bureaucratic problems of all or most exiles. So his loss was a great personal loss for me.
Thank you, Mr. Tahiri. I think it's an illustrious lifetime of service in Iran and outside afterwards, supporting Iranians no matter where they were. So thank you for sharing. And soon we will close. But before we do, I wanted to ask a question and have each of you provide your perspective, and especially given everything that we've heard. But if you could please share your thoughts on how each of us who are here today, who will be watching this later, can help build a culture of public service and human rights among Iranians, regardless of where they are, because many are young Iranians are also in the diaspora as well as inside the country. So maybe Sam, let's start off with you, and then we'll work our way back.
Well, we have a great tradition of public service in Iran. Iran is not a novice now. We have, states, nation states consist of memories and consists of shared experiences and interests. We have that, and as you can see, there are many Iranians in exile who have found the prominent positions in many foreign governments. We have 2 ministers in Sweden, we have the speaker of the Norwegian parliament, which is Iranian, we have members of parliament of Iranian origin in Germany, in France, in Britain, in the United States, in local government they are appearing. So there is a huge pool of Iranian talent and Iranian education available. And inside the country, we have many good people. Every year I receive lots of papers produced by officials, young officials within the present regime, but of course nobody takes notice of them. That could be the basis for if we have a proper government one day, and I'm sure we'll one day have, the material is there. But outside, of course, we should invest in, not only financially, but also morally and culturally and educationally, in the training of young Iranians for a future Iran to run the country, because a country of 85 million, and it's increasing. Hopefully, we'll need a large pool of talent to tackle its problems, and to also use its fantastic resources in a new way, in the interests of the nation. And this is why the initiative being taken now is of great value, to first of all propagate the idea of public service. This is very important, that you cannot be individually and personally happy and safe and self-fulfilled without living in a society that is based on solidarity, and understanding what, in the Victorian era they called the virtues, but now they call them values. But virtues or values always have both an individual and a public dimension, and one cannot continue without the other. So these two dimensions must go together. Because of the exile situation and because of the divorce that is taking place between the Iranian people as a people and the present administration in Iran, these two dimensions are separated from each other. And which means that Iranians inside Iran or outside Iran try to better themselves as individuals, but there is little attention paid to the public aspect. A friend of a family friend, in fact, of mine went to Iran 3 years ago, and she was very, was a young lady, who's about 26 years old. Was very surprised that he would go around Iran. That's before the COVID business and so on. Could go around Iran in a motorcycle, and everywhere be received, with courtesy, with hospitality, with deference, and so on. A young half French girl, going around. She's telling this in very soon in a book that she's writing about that. But at this, whenever she ran into the official Iran, there was always hostility, suspicion, and so on. So there was a big difference between Iran as individual Iranians and Iran as, if you like, a faceless state. This we have to correct it, and we have the material to correct it, but not enough. So the initiative that is being taken now is addressing this very important issue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Tahiri. And over to you, Mr. Amiri Moqaddam. How would you? What are your reflections on what Mr. Tahiri has shared?
I think there's a mute-unmute issue again.
Yes, I think it was Sam who was going to say something, but you want to go ahead, Sam?
No worries. If you can go ahead and I can speak just after. No
That's okay. Well, I'll be very short. I mean, I think that let's say Iran is in a situation where we basically need all the help all Iranians across the world and maybe rest of the people as well can give, because as also Mr. Tahiri mentioned, we have so many talented young people both inside Iran and across the world, but still are living in a country which goes in the completely opposite direction, basically in every aspect. If you look at the the natural potential that Iran has, its environment, which way it is going, what is happening to its young people. Anyone who has the possibility wants to leave the country. And so I think that knowing the great potential all, especially Iranians abroad, have, we should lead by example. I think that if we want to make a change, and I believe that a fundamental change is necessary in Iran right now, we need to start it, each one of us. We can start by ourselves, because it takes, it takes a price. We have to pay the price for it. And I think if we who are talking about it start doing it, we might also inspire other people. And otherwise, I think that most people know what needs to be done, but we wait for somebody else to do it. So we should stop waiting for somebody else and start doing it ourselves. Thank you.
An excellent way for you to close. Thank you. And over to you, Sam, for our final words from one of our panelists.
Thank you very much. And I find myself agreeing to almost everything Dr. Amiri Moqaddam has just said. I think we have a wonderfully talented diaspora in positions of influence, and not just political and social influence, but also financial influence. And I think what we need to do is actually build effective networks which can harness this influence, which can actually use it effectively and be well organized. I find that the only thing I would partly push back on what Dr. Amiri Moqaddam said is that I think individual action is great, but individual action in a group can be extremely effective, and it can amplify those efforts, and it can be the sum can be greater than the impact can be greater than some of the individual parts. And I think if we can build an effective network and a community which can fundraise and support centers that you lead, Dr. Amir Muqaddam, like Iran Human Rights, to support education efforts, scholarship, research, and as you mentioned, helping asylum seekers, but also fundraising for creating an effective community that can respond to various needs and to actually begin working on these issues, to campaign, to collaborate, to actually build an ecosystem which can create change, but also to support existing efforts like Iran Human Rights and Iran Human Rights Archives, to really ramp up their effort and the valuable work that they're doing. So for this, I really think beyond the conversation and beyond the individual actions, there needs to be a community build, and there needs to be an effort to harness and scale that up. And I think there is a lot of appetite for it. It just takes effort to organize.
And I know, Sam, once you have time, I know you'll be one of those people leading those efforts. So thank you for sharing those calls to action. And that brings us to the end of our time together. But I want to offer a warm round of thanks to our panelists for commemorating this important day by sharing their time, their knowledge with us. And thank you to each and every one of you who has joined us here, supported the foundation's work, and invested in my grandfather's legacy. The Abdolreza Ansari Scholarship is now live, and we ask you to circulate the opportunity where possible to brilliant young Iranian students and support us in growing the fund even further if possible by donating a contribution, however large or small. And you can do this on the foundation's website at persia.education/donate. Thank you everybody so much. Kheli mutshakir, and see you all soon.